Welcome to the Marriage Boss Podcast, and I'm totally pumped up today because I've got a special guest all the way from my favorite state, California. Kathy Fettke is CEO and co-founder of the Real Wealth Network, a California-based real estate investment group with over 16,000 members, host of the Real Wealth Show podcast, frequent contributor to national news including CNN, CNBC, NPR, Fox News, CBS MarketWatch, and the Wall Street Journal. She is a licensed real estate agent and former mortgage broker, and she's past president of American Women in Radio and Television and was recently recognized as one of Goldman Sachs' 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs 2 years in a row. Bravo. Loving the freedom that real estate investing can bring, Kathy is an avid traveler and enjoys hiking, rock climbing, skiing, figure skating, and surfing. She lives in Malibu, as I said, California, with her husband Rich and their 2 daughters. Kathy, welcome to the Marriage Boss Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to finally get to meet you. I've read about you, and it sounds like you are one busy lady. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you started in the real estate industry, and give us a little bit about who Kathy is.
Sure. A lot of it was by accident, quite honestly, but possibly my fate without me really knowing it at the time. My foray into real estate, again, was totally by accident. My dad, who was also a dentist, had invested in an apartment building. But like many dentists and doctors and busy professionals, he had no time to pay attention to his investments. And so the management, he had just bought shares in an LLC, and the managers mismanaged. The property went into disarray. They ended up selling at a loss, and not telling my father until about a month after the sale. He got a letter in the mail. Now, he had been writing off and depreciating this property for decades, and he would have had owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in capital gain tax. And he was in retirement. He couldn't afford to do that. So the option he had was to 1031 exchange this property to buy a replacement property and postpone the capital gain. But he only had 2 weeks to do it because you get 45 days after the sale.
Wow.
Well, I had just been married, and I said, "What's the big deal, Dad? All you need to do is find a property. Let me do that for you. Maybe my husband and I can live in it and take care of it for you and take this burden off of you." It was really kind of a labor of love.
Yeah.
And I found a property that day, big, huge house, 6 bedrooms, far more than we could afford. But I looked at it and said, I could rent some of these rooms out in the bottom of the house, and then we would actually be paying less than we pay in rent. So that's what we did. And we saved my dad all those back taxes. We ended up inheriting the house. And the way the 1031 works is that when you inherit, the property is stepped up to market value, and all that back tax was just wiped out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a super, super business deal that you did. And did you not even know you were doing that at the time?
We were just trying to help my dad. He was really stressed out. And then we thought, well, shoot, we're renters. Why don't we rent? He didn't want to be a landlord. He didn't know what to do.
Wow.
So we solved his problem, and we kind of basically took care of the house as if it were ours. We refinanced, paid him back anything he'd put into it. And in that process, we actually paid less to live there than if we rented. And the property, because it was California, it went up in value by $1 million.
Wow.
So, of course, a few years later in 2009, it went back down, but
Yeah.
That's California.
And do you still own that piece of property?
No, but that was really our foray. So that property actually saved us when my husband in 2003, so we got the property in 97, and or we took it over from my dad in 97. In 2003, my husband was diagnosed with melanoma and told he had 6 months to live. I was in denial and absolutely didn't believe the doctor, and he's fine today, and I was right, thankfully, but at the time we really didn't know. And I was a stay-at-home mom with 2 small kids, and I had this small radio show on the side. I'd been in broadcasting. I wasn't making any money, and suddenly I needed to make money because he needed to take 6 months off. If the doctor was right, he needed to live his last 6 months exactly how he wanted to, which wouldn't be working.
Wow.
And so I had to figure it out, and I took my radio show and I just started interviewing people who had made money quickly and made passive income, because I wanted to still be a mom to my kids. And so I just started interviewing people on how to create passive income and create it quickly. And it was purely for selfish reasons. And I learned, and we did what we learned. I only interviewed people who really had done what I wanted to do. And in the meantime, it turned out there was an audience out there that wanted to learn the same thing. So it grew really quickly, really overnight. I had a very popular radio show on wealth building.
Cool. And so tell us what happened. Give us a brief capsule of what happened to Rich. Obviously, this was many, many years ago, so he lived past the 6 months. And what happened, and how did it lead to where you are today?
Well, the doctor was wrong. I don't know if it was misdiagnosed. I can tell you from a spiritual perspective, we were doing a lot of prayer and cleansing and whatever it was. They thought that it had moved to his liver, but the further tests showed that it didn't. Okay. So he was fine, but what it did for us is give us a brand new start. It gave him a new lease on life. I mean, he never stresses out now about anything because he's alive. It just totally changed him from that perspective. Yeah. And for me, it empowered me to do things I didn't know I could do. So at the time, I had never really worked for money. I worked doing things I loved to do, and I followed my heart, and I liked making a difference, but I never really worked for money. And I had to suddenly learn about money, and I had to shift my mindset. That was first and foremost. To a wealth mindset and a belief that there was enough and that I could provide it and still be a mom. And so what happened is I had to make money, and I had this radio show. So I thought an easy kind of foray would be sponsorship. I would sell sponsorship. So I called every single sponsor I heard on the radio and asked if they wanted to advertise on my show. And I got nothing but no's, hundreds of them. And finally, I just said, I give up, what do I do? And all of a sudden I got this idea. Sometimes when we push and push and push, we just have to stop and say, something's not working. Yeah. Maybe it's just a little tweak that's needed. And that's all it was, is I had to change my language from, do you want to sponsor my show, to, how would you like me to feature you in my show? Now there's a fee for that, but I can feature you like a local celebrity. Wow. The first person I called said, I guess I touched on his ego, whatever it was, it worked. I charged way more than I would have charged a sponsor, but I did make him a star. I featured him on my show, and we took an angle of, and it was mortgages, because at the time it was 2003, 2004. Those guys had the money. It was the crazy mortgage. They were making $10,000 to $30,000 per loan. Wow. They had the money. So I charged a lot, and that helped us out. But I made it human interest and said, okay, tell me what people are doing with these loans. And it turns out he was a real estate investor, and he said they're using leverage to buy assets, the cash flow. So that was how I learned on my show. And as a result, our phones blew up with people who wanted mortgages. So it worked, and his business took off, but he couldn't handle it all. Wow. So he said, you know what, if you go get your real estate license, you can take these loans. So within 6 months, I was the busiest mortgage broker in San Francisco. In one commission check from one loan, my first loan, $1 million loan, I made more than I'd made in a couple months of work. So it changed our lives.
Wow. And then did Rich join you in the business then?
He, at the time, was still coaching. He was doing business coaching. And then we had... we kind of just shifted positions, where I had been taking care of the kids, and we were still in the mindset of we weren't totally sure, so just live your life. So he was taking care of the kids and the house, and we shifted roles, but he was what he called my chief support officer. Yeah. So if I needed a website, he would create it. Yeah. He was the first to say, you got this great radio show. There's this new thing called a podcast on iTunes. No one knew what that was, but he took my radio show and made it a podcast, and I was one of the first, and it took off. So
exciting. I love hearing stories that are really, out of the ruins. This is Phoenix rising out of ashes, not only in your father's situation, but then Rich's situation, and you are, one enterprising young lady. Obviously, your dad was lucky to have you as a daughter, and your husband's lucky to have you as a wife, and I'm sure your kids are lucky to have you as a mom, and
Thank
probably
you.
your customers too. So, it's so exciting when we hear, this big leap that you take. You have to just kind of sometimes go on faith. I love the fact that it was purely by accident, and certainly, when we look back, it can probably be, perceived that it was not at all an accident. It was really where you belong, and based on what you've done and what you've built, it sounds like an incredible foundation for helping so many other people. So tell us, Kathy, a little bit about the nuts and bolts of Real Wealth Network and how it works, and how somebody. I mean, is this something that anyone could get involved with?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I quickly became, because I was a radio host, and all of a sudden my show had turned into real estate investing, which I knew nothing about, but learned very quickly, because every guest I'd have on, I'd either read their book or study what they were talking about. And I would bring in these, people with 30, 40 years experience who started with nothing. Sometimes I interviewed people under the age of 30 that were already retired. So I took notes, I listened to my own shows, I learned, and we started doing it. So some of the people I interviewed talked to me about market cycles, and made it very clear that we had a problem when nobody could see it, not even our government or Wall Street. You saw The Big Short, nobody could see it. But these old-time real estate investors that I was interviewing were saying, none of this makes sense. We've never seen anything like this before. Loans are going to people who can't pay them back. You need to sell any holdings in California and exchange them, like I knew how to do with the 1031 exchange. I'd done it with my dad. Exchange them tax deferred for areas that were not overvalued. And at the time, it was Texas. Texas was actually on the opposite market cycle of San Francisco. And this is what the media gets wrong a lot of times. The U.S. is not one housing market. It's a whole bunch of markets in different cycles. So when California was peaked, Texas was just taking off. So Texas became the opposite of California, where it started attracting business because of business incentives, tax incentives, cheap land, cheap labor. So all of a sudden, jobs were going to Texas. There was a whole freeway built called Headquarter Road, just headquarter after headquarter after headquarter, massive jobs. But you know what? Housing can't keep up with that kind of growth. So housing was about 28% undervalued. You could buy a house for $120,000 brand new, but the person living in it was making $90,000. And in Walnut Creek in California, a $90,000 income would be a $1 million house. So clearly, very, very different scenario. So when the U.S. housing market collapsed, it didn't in Texas. And so we just, again, I don't want to totally say by accident, because it was my commitment to only interview people on my show who had extreme experience in what they were talking about. And so I had Kiyosaki on and people like that. And so I helped, through my show, so many people sell at the peak. One lady sold 3 Stockton properties that she sold for $400,000 each. We got her into 10 Texas properties. The 3 properties rented for $1,200 each. The 10 properties rented for $1,200 each in Texas. She quadrupled her income. She was able to quit her job and retire. And the next year, her Stockton properties, the person who bought them at the wrong time because they weren't listening to my show, those properties were worth $100,000. So she could have lost everything, but instead her values kept going up, her rents kept going up. So that's basically what we've become known for now, is helping people identify market cycles, where the job's going, how can you buy real estate in those areas before anybody else knows about it. So, we get there first, we help investors buy, and they'll either, we'll either set them up so they can buy a rental property on their own, or we'll pool funds and we'll buy something all together to make it totally passive. But now Real Wealth Network has 23,000 members who, who are building passive income through our network.
Wow. So how does someone get involved? Because our show is made up predominantly of entrepreneurs. And our people, our audience is always looking for, new ways to maybe stay in their existing job and then get a second income or a third income. I know a lot of people who have a job and a company and a third business. So we're all trying to figure out how to generate multiple revenue streams. So tell us how someone could get involved and be one of your members.
Yeah, absolutely. The first problem with entrepreneurs is that They don't necessarily have a retirement plan. They don't have a boss providing that. Generally, don't have a 401k unless they go out and get a solo 401k. So it is a great need for entrepreneurs to create this passive income stream. So important. So there's several ways that we can help people. One is to just come to realwealthnetwork.com. It's real as in real estate, wealth, like your money, and network as in the network nationwide that we have to help you with that process. You can join for free. We just ask you to fill out a couple questions when you join, and that helps us understand what you're trying to achieve, what you have to work with. And we have an enormous amount of education there. We started, most of it's free. I have my own podcast. I said, like The Real Wealth Show. I have a book called Retire Rich with Rentals on Amazon. We have blogs. We have so much free education. But we also, if you just don't even have time to do that, we have investment counselors that will just talk to you and help you and handhold you along the way. So that you can just take the next step, whatever that step might be. It might be that you don't have good credit. That's not anything to worry about. It can be fixed. So we show you the ways that you can fix your credit. Maybe your money's in the stock market because you don't know any other options. We show you how you can diversify and get into some hard assets, because stocks can disappear overnight, but real estate doesn't. And we can show you how to take your IRA and self-direct it. A lot of people don't know that they can invest their IRA into real estate with no penalties. You just self-direct it, but your broker doesn't generally want you to know that, but it's totally legal and done all the time. So lots and lots of information and education to help our members.
Sounds terrific. Is there a way to if someone has a little bit of money to get started, maybe with a group investment? Do you have any opportunities like that?
Absolutely. We basically, now that I've been doing this for so long and have aligned myself with the best in the business, we have so many opportunities come to us that are just untouchable. You wouldn't know how to find these. So a couple of developers who, it used to be that you could walk into a bank or an institutional fund and walk out with millions of dollars. It's harder now for developers. So they come to us and they have to pay a lot for our money, because if we're going to invest with them, they're going to give up a large portion of their back end profit to us. That's just the deal. But they're willing to do it. So developers will come, and I'll give you a couple of examples of ridiculous, untouchable deals that most of us wouldn't know how to do, but when we align ourselves with someone who does, we can benefit. So one of the developers, been doing it 40 years, needed the money because he wasn't getting it from the banks because of the bank, shutting down basically. We lease optioned a old commercial building right outside of San Francisco. And when you lease option, all you have to do is put up an option fee to control the property. You don't actually have to buy it. So it's a $10 million property, but we only had to put up $1.2 million to option it for 2 years and then make those payments. So we needed to raise $1.5 million to tie up this $10 million property. In that 2-year period, we tore down the commercial building and produced residential lots. We finished lots because we knew the city wanted that, and the city, before we did any of it, had said that's what they wanted, because they wanted more residential. It just doesn't exist in San Francisco. So we thought we'd get a buyer for $14 million. Pulte Homes ended up paying $20 million for that after 2 years. So our investors they made like 40% IRR. It was incredible.
That's something.
Which none of us would have been able to do on our own, but together we could.
Wow. That sounds awesome. So let's talk a little bit now about how you balance and, while you were building this, talk about your life, your marriage, raising a family, because at the Marriage Boss, we're all about being able to do our business while still having, happy, fruitful marriages and raising families that matter. So talk a little bit about that. Tell us about the important people in your world.
Well, since my husband came very close to facing death, he even wrote a book on it. It's called Extreme Success.
Cool.
He has committed to living. And so we've always taken time to have fun together. We surf together, we ski, we hike, we do a lot of family time. And we have 2 beautiful not young anymore. I mean, they're young, but they're 16 and 23, but 2 daughters that we just adore, and try to be at anything that's important to them. We will be there because the lifestyle we've created that can allow that. So family and marriage comes first.
Cool.
However, that doesn't come with not to say there hasn't been a tremendous amount of learning.
Yeah.
Generally, you marry someone who is the opposite of you, who kind of makes up for your weaknesses. And so it's a beautiful thing in the beginning, and it's the thing that will drive you crazy through the marriage. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm quick. I see something, I want it, I do it. He is a thinker and a planner and a preparer, and so he's not going to jump into something. Now, in the beginning, that would drive me crazy, and it would drive him crazy. I'd say, I want to buy this property, and he'd say, well, I need this, this, and this. And I'd say, oh, you're so, we're going to lose the deal if you don't move quickly.
Yeah.
So we learned that we both have strong skills that, really complete each other, where now I am trained to slow down and say, I found this property. I know these are all the things you're going to want to know about it. I already had it done. I don't do it. I have someone bring all the research to me so he can review it, and then we can both move forward, and then he has to sort of move forward, not be stuck in the analysis paralysis. Yeah. So we both have to kind of use each other's strengths.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done. So the same thing, my business absolutely took off. It just, wow. And I didn't have the foundation that, a business should have. And he's a business coach. So it made sense that he would come in and run the business, which came with its own, of course, challenges. So we just did a mastermind where it was through Infusionsoft, Clayton Mask. He looked at us and goes, I rarely suggest a co-CEO model. I don't think it works, but with you two, it would work. So just this past year, he came in as co-CEO, whereas I was CEO, but not really great at execution,
Yeah.
So now I can still guide the company with vision and knowledge, but he can make sure that the systems and foundation are in place. And yet we really try not to cross over those strengths. So let him really just go nuts with the foundation and detail and structure, and let me go nuts with the meeting people and doing what I do best. So
it sounds like a perfect marriage, and it sounds like you evolved into the place you're at today, which is,
yes.
What we're all about is you got to stick together, you got to appreciate each other, and I like when you make a decision to marry someone and then you work through the things, because there's nothing better than a mature relationship that has endured thick and thin, and it's just beautiful to see that you've gotten to a point, and that's what maturity does to us, age, of course.
Yeah.
It makes us realize, certainly life-threatening issues do it, but none of us really know how long we have, so we really do need to work in the now, and I can totally relate to your story, because I'm the risk taker in my life, and Carol is very conservative. She needs to know all the details. She needs to think twice, and I just jump off cliffs. And, but it's fun. It's what makes it exciting, And also, I think that person who's grounding keeps people like you and I at least a little safer.
Right. It gets tiring to jump in the deep end before you know how to swim. It's really kind of nice to go, maybe I should learn first and slow down, and you can help me with that. So
it's exciting.
But I will say, there's never an end to the learning. Our business grew so quickly that, Rich and I get along fabulously. We always have. We've had to work through some of these things, like I said, these differences in personality. But what ended up happening maybe 5 years ago is it was so overwhelming with the business growth and raising kids and trying to stay healthy and getting meals on the table and all that we kind of found ourselves good friends and good parents and good business partners, but we'd kind of lost the romance. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, I just woke up and like I needed something different, and talked to him about it, and he was like, hey, whatever you want to do. And so then we just started really focusing on that again, and that meant signing up for marriage counseling, even though we got along great. But mm-hmm. it was like a space where we could really be honest about some of the things we hadn't talked about or hadn't brought up, which for me was I wanted more romance. Yeah. And then after that we signed up for tantra classes and weekends away, and so I think that's a trap that long-time marriages can get into. We've been married 20 years, and I can tell you that just with this past year of focus on that part of it, all it needs is focus. Just even what we learned in tantra, I know it sounds like some crazy wild stuff, but literally all we've learned at this point is to take time to look at each other, to breathe together, to just even 5 minutes, just look at each other and breathe in silence and connect eye to eye has changed. That was enough to bring us back to what feels like newlyweds.
Well, being business professionals and being very good at what we do in the day requires our attention. So a lot of the work I do, I talk about attention. If you give attention to source and self or your business. And so when you give attention to your spouse or your significant other, all of a sudden, magically, you identify what's going on. So if there are issues or blocks, you can get past them. But then if you do, and if they're not there anymore, you can end up seeing this person, and there's a brand new person there too. This newer, more evolved, more mature, more seasoned. Let's face it, when we grow, we get wisdom, and we figure out how to do it. And I love what you were saying about, knowing what he likes and then getting him all that ahead of time. I mean, that's delicious. That's music to anyone's ears. When someone finds out, you basically found out what he likes, and then you give it to him.
Well, and I'm terrible at it. Listen, I'm the worst person in the world you'd want to get data from, but as a CEO, I understand how to get it. So, and that you said I'm a very busy woman, and the funny thing is I smiled because I'm not anymore. I accomplish a lot in a day, but I have now hired people who are really good at specific things that especially I am not good at. So if I'm not good at data, well, guess what? I'm going to hire the best person to do that for me so that I can hand that to my husband when he needs it. We have hired very, very good people. So I actually feel more free than ever and have time to just do the things I love, which is my podcast, writing, blogs, speaking at events, driving the company forward, making sure that we're on the cutting edge, and then having people that can implement my ideas like that. So I'll have an idea, but I'm not an implementer. Cool. I have a personality test. I'm the idea person. I am not the planner or the implementer, but I'm surrounded by those people who love my ideas. And
sounds great. It sounds like a dream life that you've created, and I have a great quote for you by Deepak Chopra.
All right.
When I was young, I did everything and accomplished nothing. In the middle of my life, I did less and accomplished more, all with the hopes that someday I would do nothing and accomplish everything.
That's great.
And it sounds like you're getting there.
Yeah.
So that's that. Listen, what could be better than to? I have this vision. Have you ever seen the movie X-Men?
Yes.
Okay, so you remember Professor Xavier? He was in that, that special building that he built, and he would be sitting on that throne, and ideas would be coming out of his head, and he was like, they put that electric thing. So I have this vision that someday I will be in a glass room on this glass throne with a colander on my head, basically, whether it's wireless or wired, and there's a huge screen up in front of me. And I am sitting there with my eyes closed, hands on the armrests, and all the thoughts are coming out of my head onto the screen. And then there are other people in that room that are taking those ideas and then running with them and making them happen.
I love it.
And one of my good friends and co-collaborators and my bestie, Genevieve, she always says, "Oh, you're going to have some minions to basically go and do your ideas." And in a funny way, people who come up with tons of ideas need other people, because idea people aren't always good at implementing. So
terrible.
I love that you came up with that, and sometimes the better your idea, makes me wonder if some of those great inventors from the past that took 20 years to create, let's say the light bulb, if Thomas Edison was in a room with 100 people, whether or not they could have gotten that thing done sooner.
Well, it's my understanding, and I'm not a history buff, but that Thomas Edison was the one who got the idea from the idea person and implemented it.
Oh, really?
Wow. Could be wrong, but
we're going to have to look into that now. All right, if we find it, we'll put it in the show notes. That's beautiful. Well, it was so much fun to have you on today, and I think that this is something that we'll have to cover further. Tell us a little bit, Kathy, where people can find you again and how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. realwealthnetwork.com is our website. You can join for free. You'll get access to just a ton of information and an investment counselor to help you. We also have a Real Wealth Investor Academy that we've reduced to $10 a month so that it's affordable for anybody, and you get really high level investor education that people are paying tens of thousands of dollars for, and 100% of that goes to our foundation, so we're changing lives through that education. And then, of course, Retire Rich with Rentals is my book on Amazon, and then The Real Wealth Show on iTunes.
Cool. And we will put all those goodies in the show notes.
Okay.
And it was just so nice to meet you and have you on the show. And I look forward to supporting you and your mission going forward.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me just change a little after yoga this morning.
I didn't want to say anything, but now that you brought it up, thanks for being a good sport and going through with the video portion. But it was great. Looking forward to the next time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.